What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Major Mixtape Podcast. I'm your host, Jason. Hope you're doing well. Every now and then, I like to bring in different podcast hosts so you can be introduced to their shows and what else is happening on the interwebs. And on the show today is Nick Andrade from the Autosave Podcast and a football podcast. Nick, how are you doing? Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Wis, and thank you for letting me be a part of this journey with you because, again, podcasting is really tough. And getting me on as a guest, I really appreciate it. Again, our kind of friendship spans, I don't know, 6, 7 years, I guess, since school. Yeah.
Yep. And again, I'm sorry you've known me that long.
That's okay. Our love of all things nerdy brought us together. And this is why we still have a relationship today, because we have a lot of things in common.
So let's talk about the Autosave podcast, because that's the one that's, you're really, like front and center right now. Yep. So for anyone who hasn't listened to it, give us a brief explanation. What is the Autosave podcast?
So Autosave, we like to say, is basically a book club for video games. It gives people the opportunity to either listen along with us as we play the game. We go really, really in depth into each mission, each quest. We don't miss out on a lot of things. And if you have a lot of frustrations with the games you play, or maybe there's some certain insight that you want to hear more about, or other people talk about the game, that's basically what we do. We split games up. So we play an entire game. We split games up into about 8 to 10 episodes where we cover maybe like 3 or 4 missions a week for an hour-long podcast. And we just basically go through the game and we vent out our frustrations. Like I said, we kind of talk things out together. My co-host, Camille Salazar-Hadaway, is an award-winning esports host, actually. And she love that she's on the show and that she's just as energetic about this show that I am. But it's just basically following along with your favorite games. And so far, we only have one game out right now. It's Spider-Man Miles Morales. But we're actually, this week is the final episode. And then we're moving on to our next game. And we're super excited to keep this journey going.
When you're going through a game and prepping it for the show, do you sit there and play it all the way through and then do all the episodes, or do you play a couple of episodes or play a couple of levels and then do the show and then play some more levels and then do the show? So it's not all at once and then have to kind of go back and try to remember everything from the beginning.
That's a good question. And I'm still trying to juggle that right now. I played Spider-Man Miles Morales twice. And they were both before we did the show. So what I actually ended up doing it with that game is we use a lot of sound ups during the show. So we take clips from the game and we insert them to kind of push our show forward and give a little bit more context. So I actually go through YouTube walkthroughs after I play the game, and I'm clipping out the certain points that I like. And so I kind of went through that journey without playing again. The second game went by, same thing. And I started to realize I'm starting to forget some of the things, like in-depth things that I want to talk about throughout the game. So now we're on our third game right now as it stands. And now I'm playing the game as is. So I'll play a few missions that I know we're going to record later in the week. I take some notes on it, and then I build kind of an outline for it for the show, and then move on to the next week. Because actually this week we did 2 episodes and I had prepped one the week before. And as I was doing the show, I slightly got lost in terms of like, wait, what exactly is happening here? So now I'm making sure, like, I think it should be fresh in my mind when I'm recording these.
When it comes to, putting out a gaming podcast like this, and I remember when you put it out there, I was like, okay, so it's kind of like a walkthrough, but you see those, those videos on YouTube, as you mentioned, where, they talk their way through the whole game, and it's more like, do this, do this, do this. But yours isn't that. It's very much anecdotal. It's very much, this was my experience of these levels, as you mentioned, a book club. So how much of that plays into the fact that your podcast is not on YouTube? It's a very much an auditory medium.
Yeah, that's what I've juggled with this whole time, because I do want to put it out in video. But as of right now, I think we're in a good spot in terms of audio. But I think that's where the whole idea of the podcast came from, is there's so many, content out there in terms of playing games and visually watching people play games. It's like, how do we kind of switch that up if we are in an audio format? And I think that's why, like, if we were to go and do more of a walkthrough type style, it doesn't make that much sense because we're only an audio medium. But because we're kind of anecdotal and we kind of describe how we're feeling, and it's more, we're talking about what we're going through rather than telling people what they're doing. I think that's where we kind of find our comfort zone. So that's where we really, I think that's where we really honed in of what we're doing for the show.
To anyone who has listened to it, of course, they hear your reaction to the story, your reaction to, like, basically the video game movie that a lot of these games are. Yeah. And you have to think that certain games, you're not doing an anecdotal Candy Crush for 12 episodes. It's not going to happen. So when you're sitting there saying, okay, well, this is the next game on the list, what is it about the game that you sit there and go, we need to do that one?
I think mostly it's how big the game is. If it's a AAA, heavy hitter, we want to go through a game that can kind of cast the largest net in terms of audience wise. But at the same time, I'm looking for a lot of story deep games that have a lot of dialogue, so that can also help tell our story so that we can use that and talk about it. So it doesn't make the listener lost. I feel like if it's just an hour podcast of us talking and there's no kind of little interbreak of where we are in the game, I feel like that you kind of lose where we are in general. So that kind of helps us push us forward. But that's one thing I've been thinking about lately is our first 2 games that we've played. We've only released 1, but we've done 2 already. We're both very dialogue heavy. And so now when we came to our 3rd game, we thought to ourselves, all right, our first 2 games were PlayStation heavy. We want to be able to play Xbox and Switch games and PC games as well. So what's our next journey? And my co-host, Camille, brought up her favorite game. I'm not going to say what these games are, but the tease here is they don't have dialogue. And for me, I know I'm a big Pokemon fan. I played every Pokemon game since I was a kid, and I'll continue to do so until I die. I really don't care. But that doesn't have any dialogue. So how can we still do the show if there's no dialogue? And that's what we're going through right now in our 3rd game that we're playing. And we found a good way to do it where it still has the same as it did with the dialogue, but it's a little bit more challenging, but I kind of like it.
When you think about, the idea behind Autosave, it's not just a gaming podcast, where you sit there, you talk about a game and then you move on to the next one on the next episode. It's very much a journey. So when it came to putting this podcast together, the idea inception of it, how did this come about?
Well, I because I'm also on a football podcast. The main thing that I talked about with my boss at the time, Clay, was how do we make this long lasting in terms of people can actually, we wanted to make it timeless so that people can go back and listen to episodes. I looked at it for an example of mine was The Ringer, the Rewatchables podcast where they rewatch movies and talk about them. That was something where it's like I can look through their catalog of 30, 40 episodes. And if there's movies I haven't watched, I can just pick and choose the movies that I have in terms of, or some people even like to listen to movie or podcasts about games or movies that they've never even watched or played, which I don't get. That's not how I enjoy my media. But so that's how it kind of started in terms of how do we make this something that's more timeless. And at first, the inception was that we played a different game every week. Then I started to realize how overwhelming that was, because that's a lot of time that you're putting in. And again, it's you're glazing over everything. So it's a review. And I didn't want the podcast to be a review where we were really just saying, oh yeah, this game's great. This part's great. If you want to buy it, you can buy it. That's not necessarily what I wanted to do. I wanted to be able to dive into the game and kind of bring it to life a little bit, where we're really going through everything and every part of the story. I look at it like a book series that turns into a movie, let's say. If I read the book, sometimes I don't mind if they did a complete series of everything that happened in the book. I wouldn't mind. Like a Harry Potter franchise, if they literally did every chapter, I would watch it. Lord of the Rings, same thing probably. So it's like that in terms of how I wanted to kind of maneuver this podcast. I really wanted to get into the nitty-gritty.
But as a gamer, when you sit and play a game, more often than not, you're just playing it for enjoyment. Mm-hmm. But now you're playing the game knowing that you're going to dissect it, not just the game itself, but your own feelings towards the game and how it makes you feel. So how much of that, playing the game, not for yourself, but for everybody else, does that take away from the enjoyment of the game itself?
Yeah, I think it takes away a little bit because we both work in sports. Something that I always think about is when I want to unwind after work, I don't necessarily want to watch sports. There are certain ones that I do because I'll always will. But in general, I want to turn that side of my brain off. And when you kind of try to monetize your hobbies and, you have a Twitch era, you have YouTube, where everyone's trying to commodify their hobbies in some sort of way. And I think that takes a little bit of the enjoyment out. I was talking to a friend of mine who was a Twitch streamer, and he ended up quitting Twitch because he lost the enjoyment of playing games. And I feel like a lot of people who either play games through Twitch or like we're doing it in a podcast form, sometimes you lose a little bit of that value in terms of having fun because it's almost like a job. But the counter, and everyone will always say this, is like, well, you're playing video games for a living. Yes, I understand. It's very enjoyable, but sometimes it feels like a task rather than it's something you want to unwind and do in your bed, at 2 a.m. You don't really want to think. So I'm always having to think while I play, which takes a little bit of the enjoyment out.
Now, you mentioned that with the first game that you did, Spider-Man Miles Morales, you had played it before. So you already kind of knew what you were getting into with this game. Mm-hmm. But for future games, would you rather pick a game that you've played before analyzing it so you can at least enjoy it? Or do you want to do the analyzing upon first take so you get that initial, gut reaction to what's happening?
That's a great point. I think it's a little bit of both. We've played 3 games so far. 2 of them I had already played, and 1 I was playing for the first time. And I gotta say, playing it for the first time and being able to analyze it after is really enjoyable. And I think you could probably say this. There are times in your life in terms of like movies or video games or reading a book or whatever that you would love to have that first time reaction back, right? It's like what I remember when I found out that Darth Vader was Luke Skywalker's father.
Wait, what?
Oh, sorry. Whoops. Was that
spoiler?
Spoiler? Oh my God.
Well, you know what? Movie came out in 1980. So if you haven't seen Empire Strikes Back by now, dear viewers, dear listeners, screw you. Go watch Empire Strikes Back.
I think they have. I'm going to guess your listeners
by now.
Yeah. But
there's one person that said, what?
I was going to watch that next week. What the hell? But yeah, I like playing a game with fresh eyes. But at the same time, if you've played it a couple times, you can, I think, analyze it better. And yeah.
So when it comes to the games, for you as a gamer, taking the podcast aside, what is it for you as a gamer that draws you to want to pick up and play a game?
For me, the number one is story. And I think although TV shows and movies, they give you a special feeling after you watch or while you're watching. And I think video games is a little different because you're immersed in the action and you almost feel like you are the character or you are a character's friend or you are there witnessing this story unfold in front of your eyes with them or, just with, I don't know, with these characters. It's a great feeling. So for me, like that's where my love of games comes from the most, especially when I'm playing, is the story and how I feel. and while I'm watching cutscenes or whatnot, and I feel like the emotion of it is a lot heavier than it is when you're playing something and being a part of it rather than being a passenger, which I think you are while you're watching a movie or watching a show or reading a book. You're a passenger. And I think with a video game, you kind of really immerse yourself because you feel like you are those characters.
Now, you have a television production background as a producer. You know, you've done a lot of editing as well. So how much of that has helped in the production of your podcasts?
So much. You don't realize it because I don't know. I've done it for so many years, but you're able to translate what you've learned in the broadcast space and put it into a podcast. It's still very much the same kind of thing. From ideation, exactly what I used to do in TV promo, working there is I would come up with an idea, then I would write a pitch deck to kind of pitch the idea, which I did. I pitched Autosave and the million names that I picked for it until it got to Autosave and everything else that was involved. And that whole process, and then pre-production and finding a co-host and bringing it to life, and then writing an outline for the show, and then producing the show. And then at the time I edited maybe the first 15 episodes myself. So taking back, and I had very little, experience in Adobe Audition, but because of what I've taken away from Photoshop and Premiere and all that and After Effects, that kind of translated pretty well into the post-production part of it as well. So every little aspect, it might be a little different, but you're able to use your skills that you've learned in broadcasting and put them into something new because they're all kind of in the same kind of area.
For podcast listeners who just sit there and say, well, you just play video games and then you talk about it, right?
Yeah.
You know, for people who don't necessarily appreciate, the amount of work that goes into producing this show, so let's go through the process, from, we'll just take one episode of Autosave from beginning to end to publish. Yeah. What's the process for you?
Well, first I want to say, I feel like anytime, I don't know, like my girlfriend will bring up like, oh, like Nick does podcasts to like somebody new. And I'd be like, yeah, I know it's another white guy with a podcast, but like we do put a lot of work into it. And I know it's just, we're talking about video games, but a lot of work goes into it. So weekly, so we do a show weekly, which I think the most important thing for people who do podcasts is if they can have a structured schedule. And it doesn't necessarily have to be once a week. If you can only do it once every 2 weeks or once a month, as long as you have that schedule where you're kind of coming out around the same time, or maybe it's Tuesday of every month or Tuesday every week, having some sort of schedule is the best way to do it in general, even if you don't have that much time for it. So I always tell people, it's like, you may be a little, you're not sure what you could do timing wise, but try to find your best fit and then make that happen. So people know at least, all right, he has something once a month or he has something once every 2 weeks. And it usually comes out on Tuesday. So people look for it. I think that's really important. But for my week in terms of podcast producing, I'll play a part of the game that I need to do for the show. So that might take 4, 5, 6 hours, maybe more. It depends, maybe less. Depends on whatever the game is. I take notes while I play. So I'll like structure it into like missions or where I'm at. And then I'll usually just do point form notes, what I want to talk about for the show. And then the biggest part for me is the outline. And I think that's the most important for the show production, is just having an organized outline in terms of what you're going to talk about and kind of feeding things to your co-host as well. So that takes the most amount of time. I would say it's about like, I don't know, I spend like 3 to 6 hours a week fine tuning my outline. And then we do the show. It's usually an hour, but I give myself 2 hours of time because it usually goes over that. And then I don't edit right now. I move that over to another producer of mine, that I trust very well, Dylan Wilson. He does that now, but at the start, for the first 15 episodes, I would edit those shows, and that would be another 4 hours of my time. So all in all, like you're spending maybe at least like 15, 20 hours a week just on one episode that's an hour long. And you could spend way more depending on what the show is, or if it's 3 hours long or something like that. But that's where my sweet spot is in terms of my schedule and other work and trying to fit this in at the same time.
Now, you mentioned, of course, that you have an editor, which is a huge help.
Huge.
And Autosave is part of Space Monkey Media, which has a podcasting arm, which is Stringer Labs.
Yes.
So when it comes to, the difference between an indie podcast, because you've done that as well, and then being a part of a network, what is the difference? What does a network bring to a podcast? And then how does an indie podcast, do they get picked up, or should people be pitching their ideas to networks?
It's hard because if you have an independent podcast, I feel like it's all 100% on you in terms of, yes, it might be a lot of work, but you have 100% creative control over everything, right? I talk some of my ideas out to my producers, right? And sometimes they might not think it's the right thing to do, or it might be maybe I should do this or something different. But if you are doing your own podcast and you have the freedom to do whatever you want, so that's one bonus of that. But in terms of having kind of a production house behind you, it's mostly the structure of it all. I'm able to organize my time, and I'm also having somebody coming to me and be like, hey, we got to record this week. When can you record? I think that's really the most important thing, because sometimes life gets away from you and you have a lot on your plate, and the last thing you want to do that week is find time for a podcast. But if you're able to have, producer to help you out, and then, they're also helping you edit the video or the audio of it all, I think that it just adds so much more in terms of being able to put things out on time. Whereas if you're independent, it's a lot of work, and a lot of times it just goes unnoticed. And I mean, there's so many podcasts out there. How do you either make an imprint just by yourself, or, do you have the patience for that? And I feel like a lot of people, if they don't have backing, might not have the patience for it, because you have to dedicate so much time. And sometimes, you see either the views or the downloads and it's not translating. And it's like, well, how long do I do this until I tell myself, it's not worth it?
How much, as a producer, how much do you get caught up in the analytics? Or do you sit there and forcibly tell yourself, no, I'm not going to look at the downloads. I'm not going to look at the engagement. I'm just going to look at getting the best possible quality content out there for listeners? I see the numbers. I know what they're like. I'm not fazed by it, whether it's good or bad. I'm doing something that I enjoy. And I feel like when you really critically analyze the numbers, or you're looking at this to really become, a job or something you're getting paid for, I feel like, I don't know, I feel like you won't go far. It has to be something you're really passionate about if you want something to succeed. And those numbers, they don't matter. What matters is that you're putting out content, and you will find people. I think people don't realize this, but there are 7 billion people in this world, and everyone has some sort of little niche that they really love. And if you can connect to just a few people that way, and it starts to spread regardless. I'm noticing that already. There was a little bit of pressure coming out of the show. Camille has a following online. I don't have as much. But there was a little bit of pressure to have a good launch. But as it is now, I'm just trying to do something that I really love, and hopefully that can translate. But I'm not too bothered by it, because I know it'll come. If you're passionate about something, people can see that passion. If you want to fake it, then people will know it. But I think if you're passionate about it, people will see that, and people will, I think, listen. Sometimes that doesn't happen, unfortunately, but I'm okay. If something bombs, I'm going to go on to the next thing. It's not going to bother me. I'm just putting out something that I love, and hopefully other people love it too. And that's all that matters to me. So the numbers really don't matter. What has the reaction been to Autosave now that you're, almost a full game through of, like the first run?
It's surprising. It's doing pretty well. It's better than I expected. And what I'm noticing the most is this whole process trying to make a timeless podcast. It works in terms of we're getting a good amount of downloads every day of the week. So it's not just on the launch day on the Wednesday. It's every day people are going back. And even I was looking at the analytics the other day, and a month in, people are still downloading that first episode. If we were talking about the Blue Jays last night or the Maple Leafs last night, there's only certain days that people will click that before it dies. But this one, it's like, okay, I listened to episode 4. Let me go back and listen to episode 1 or whatever it is. People can pick it up wherever they want. So I think that's what I'm starting to notice. And that's what I'm really liking about where it's going.
We talked about the amount of work that goes into an episode. So, and that's a lot. When you can think about how much goes into that 1 hour of content, then you have to balance that with, the home life, the social life, the work life, so you can actually pay to do the social life, the home life, and the creative life. Yeah. How hard is that, work, creative, life balance? Because before you're saying they're going work balance, life balance, just juggling two. Now you've got the third in there.
Which is so hard. I mean, I've been working, 2-3 jobs the last, 5 years or so. It gets tiring, but this was a point where I was in a good spot in terms of I had lost one of my jobs during the pandemic, and then I got into Space Monkey. So I was doing Space Monkey, and then I was doing another part-time thing. So my time was pretty evened out. But since then, I've gotten another job that is requiring me to do, a full 40 hours a week. And then I had also 2 other things. So I started realizing at the time with Space Monkey, I was producing 3 podcasts. I was hosting 2, doing pre-production for 2, and then editing a third. And I was editing all 3. I started becoming really overwhelmed, especially spending time with my girlfriend, with my family, spending time with myself, which is very important. But I had no time for anything, and I was getting so burnt out. So I had to take some of that responsibility away at Space Monkey. So now I'm only focusing on the 2 podcasts that I'm doing. I'm no longer editing it, even though, it's my baby and I want to edit it, but I had to take a step back. But it's to juggle all of it. I don't know how people do it sometimes, especially if this is like a passion-y project of mine. So it's like, I want to make all this time, but I understand why people might do one podcast and then never record again, because it is challenging to find that balance. Yeah.
As a listener of podcasts yourself, when you're discovering new things to listen to, and of course, with your own podcast, what do you think matters most? The content or the production quality?
Content, 1,000%. I could create a YouTube video tomorrow that is on a Nokia flip phone from 2007. And if the content is there, that's all that matters. The production value will come. And I think it's hard too, because I feel like everything's a production value now. Everything has high production value, like Twitch streams. Before people even start going live on Twitch, what do? They buy a $3,000 PC. They buy a $2,000 mic. They buy a webcam that's $3,000. Like, they put so much money in before they even put it out there. And then sometimes a lot of people are like, oh no, like I don't have a following. I just spent $5,000 putting something out there. So to me, I think there has to be a little bit of production quality, but for the most part, it's content. I mean, if you're recording, like, you can record on an iPhone and it still sounds pretty good. So I feel like content is key for almost everything in terms of, if you want something to succeed, it has to have some sort of, I don't know, it just has to have good content and production.
Now, I'm not going to ask what games are officially scheduled to come down the pipe.
Yeah,
that would be spoilers.
I gotta hide it. Yes, spoilers.
But is there a game out there that is on your radar? You haven't told anyone yet, but you want to make sure that eventually, somewhere down the road, it becomes a subject for an Autosave podcast?
Yes, because as our current situation now, we have episodes locked in basically until November. And then we're also doing another game on top of that. But there's a game coming out soon that lines up with the end of our second game, where I want to be able to play that almost as it comes out. So that's what I'm really excited for. But and we haven't done that before because it's mostly games that have been out for a year or 6 months or 8 months or whatever. So there's no pressure. But now I want to get to a point because the end goal again is that video game companies come to us and ask us to deep dive into these games. So being able to do a game that's relatively new, like that's something that I really want to do and I'm excited for.
There is a worry though. And we saw this with Cyberpunk 2077, that you get a game and there's so much hype and people are so just waiting for it. And we saw the same thing with No Man's Sky. I'm still, PTSD from No Man's Sky, before all the updates. But is there a worry of, jumping on a game the minute it comes out because, all the cutscenes look good. And then, having that, I keep flashing back to, I don't know if you ever saw the movie Fanboys.
No.
Where this group of four, they basically tried to sneak into, it's set in 1999. They basically tried to sneak into Lucasfilm to get their friend who was dying to see Star Wars 1. And so when they finally get to the theater, just before the movie starts, I can't remember who it is, but someone looks at the group and goes, what if it sucks?
Yeah.
So is there that worry, when you see a game and you're so hyped for it and you have that moment of, but what if it sucks?
There is a worry. I remember specifically No Man's Sky. You told me about this game when it was coming out.
I was so hyped for it.
You were so, and I looked it up and I'm like, okay, this sounds, and it was not good. And I remember talking to you and you were just like, yeah, it's not good. So, I mean, but it ended up being better, correct? After through some patches, right?
Oh, absolutely. Like they did actually, to their credit, they turned No Man's Sky into a much more enjoyable experience. It's not the game I'm binging now, but I would happily go back to No Man's Sky now that they've tweaked and made it that much better.
To answer the question, there is a huge hesitancy, especially games are $100 now. Like they're expensive. So diving into a game that's not completely done or ready or have malfunctions or whatever it is, it's hard. For me, it's like if I hear rumors about it, I'll stay away. I heard things about Cyberpunk, so that's why I didn't purchase it at the time. But I'm going all into like the big name games that I love, because I'm always someone who always dives into titles in terms of that I know that I'm familiar with. I'll always buy those games. So I'll do that no matter what. And sometimes I've been disappointed, but I always look past it because I'm like, okay, it is what it is. But, for dev teams and for companies trying to rush games out for the Christmas season, it doesn't work to your advantage if the game is buggy. So if you have to postpone a game 5-6 months to make sure it's ready, then if it's good at the end of the day, no one's going to remember that it came out 5 months late. Right? But everyone's going to remember how bad and glitchy it was. And Cyberpunk, unfortunately, got hit so hard. And a few other games have as well, where the hype is real and then it falls flat. And then we're wondering, well, why didn't you spend 4 months extra on that game? People would have been fine with it. I'm fine. Like Spider-Man No Way Home's coming out. How many times did they maybe have to postpone that, or Shang-Chi or Black Widow? They had to postpone those movies for a while because of certain things. And I'm okay with that if the end product is good, but just make sure it's good. That's all.
You're listening to the Major Mixtape Podcast. Our guest today, Nick Andrade from the Autosave Podcast and a football podcast. We're going to step away for just a few seconds, and when we come back, we're going to learn a little bit more about Nick.
The Neatcast, your source for offbeat news.
Marauding monkeys bring fear to historic Indian tourist haven. These monkeys have gotten aggressive. Anytime you hold a package in their hand, they'll come up and they'll snatch it from you. Like gang members. Like, take your chain.
Oh my god.
Hot takes on sports.
Drew Brees is a legend. How dare you?
He is, but he's done.
No, he's not. You pardoned him. He's coming back.
He wants to pardon Drew Brees. I want to throw him in prison.
And deep dives into the paranormal.
The Loveland Frogman At approximately 3:30 a.m., an unnamed businessman, the most credible witness maybe you can find.
Unnamed
businessman. I was just doing business when I saw a frogman.
Join us every Monday and let's talk some bullshit. Available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and all your favorite podcasting apps.
All right, welcome back to the Made You a Mixtape podcast. Our guest today, Nick Andrade from Autosave Podcast and a football podcast. Now it's time to learn a little bit more about you. Now we're going to step away from the video games a bit. We're going to learn a little bit about Nick. Now we've talked about your production background before. So what was it that made you want to get into broadcasting?
Well, the main thing was sports broadcasting. At the time I'm kind of, I'll go anywhere in terms of broadcasting in general. I like most of, entertainment. So it doesn't really matter what kind of avenue it is. But at the time I went to U of T to become a teacher. And halfway through my bachelor's degree, I realized, oh God, I don't think I want to be a teacher anymore. So I was like, what the hell do I do? And I didn't know what to do because at the time I was a history and political science major. I wanted to be a history teacher. But I loved what I was doing. So I'm just like, okay, let me finish this degree and then I'll figure it out later. So I finished my degree. I got my honors of Bachelor's of Arts in history and political science. And then I'm like, well, I'm not going to be a spy for CSIS or the FBI. So that's out of the question. So what do? I was working at Walmart at the time. And I really didn't know where I was going with my life. And I met my friend Drew, who went to the College of Sports Media. Actually, he just applied. And then we always talked sports all the time. And he's like, hey man, like you're really knowledgeable. Like, why don't you apply for the school? And I'm just like, you know what? I think that's a great idea because I loved, broadcasting in high school. I wanted to be a journalist, and it's unfortunate because at the time I was in a program where we actually did video content. We did the morning announcements on a telecast. Like I was a big part of it, but my teacher at the time was not the greatest. He might have been able to mold other people, but whatever my style of learning was didn't work out with how he taught. So I lost my love of that. And that's where at the time I had met a teacher of mine who was a history teacher who I absolutely loved and I connected with, and I loved history and all that. So that's what kind of made me want to do that. So it kind of made me think, okay, you know what? I used to want to be a journalist. I used to want to be in broadcasting. Like, let's see how that goes. And that's how my whole foray into broadcasting began. It was just through that because I applied, I got in, and that was it. And I fell in love with it.
I'm hearing the story about the broadcasting at the school. How much did you sit there and go, oh dear God, that was me, when you saw Spider-Man Homecoming? And they had those little snippets of like the school broadcasts.
Oh yeah, every time I get heckled in Brampton, by the way, for my morning announcements because I used to have a line that was "Let's check it out," and I did it in this weird way, and so I would get heckled by certain people at the mall just yelling "Let's check it out" at me. But yeah, I don't want to see those clips. I was also like 4 feet tall at the time. Luckily, I grew, but I was a little man with a big personality. I really don't want to see that again.
Obviously, you got to that point where there was that to quote Ross Geller, pivot. You had you had that moment where it's like, no, I'm doing this right now, but it's not really what I want to do. That's going to be a tough moment. So what was the thought process when you hit that wall and said, yeah, but maybe I need to go this way?
It was really tough. The school we went to, though, was also very expensive, and I couldn't afford it. So I wasn't really sure. I felt so lost at the time. It's like, there are so many. I always kept like thinking about all those times that I did XYZ and that never I stopped doing it. It's like, why did I stop doing that? Like at the time, I remember when I was like 19, 20, I met a bunch of YouTubers that I became really close with. And then I started my own YouTube channel and they started promoting me. And at the time, I think I had like 5,000 subscribers, but I kind of fell out of it for certain reasons. And I always I always regret it to this day. I'm like, those people are now pretty famous. And it's not, I didn't want to be famous. I just wanted to be able to create content. But I was just like, damn, like if I stuck with this, like where would it have taken me? So at that point in my life, when I was working at Walmart as a customer service manager, I'm just like, what am I doing with my life, and where am I going? Like, I have an education, like I need to be making the most of what I'm doing. And the leap to that was really difficult because I didn't have the money. My parents didn't have the money for this. Luckily, I have a very gracious aunt of mine who has no children. So she saved up a lot of money, and she said, Nick, you know, I'm like a son to her as well. So she's like, Nick, if this is something you want to do, I'll give you a loan. And that's how I took that jump. And it was a really, like, I'm someone who sometimes, I don't like saying it, but I like comfort to an extent. I like to go after things, but I also sometimes can sit on, you know, on a couch for 40 hours and feel like I accomplished something and I felt good. But for me, that huge leap was really difficult for me, and it was really tough. And I know my dad was like thinking like, oh, like, why do you want to do this? Like, it's expensive, like go into something practical. I thought you want to be a teacher, all that stuff. So it was difficult, but I knew that this was something that I was going to be passionate about. And that was the most important thing. And that's what drove me. And as soon as I stepped in those doors into that school, college sports media that you taught at as well, you teach at now still, I believe. Mm-hmm. As soon as I stepped in, I felt like I was at home, even though, yeah, it was sports related, but just in general, the production and what we had to do there, I fell in love with that. And I knew it's like, that's why sometimes it's like, if people think their dreams aren't realistic, yeah, sometimes there's an extent to that. But if you're doing something you love, you'll find it like right away. And I knew right away I was right in the place that I needed to be. And all that time that it took for me to get there really helped out. So even though I was in a place where I didn't know what I would do with my life, I think that ended up actually helping more in terms of getting me to that step.
When you take a look back at, you know, starting that YouTube channel and going after these things that you know were really passionate about at the time, obviously, like everything that you've been able to achieve so far has been driven by passion, and it takes a leap of faith to be able to sit there and say, I've got this idea, I've got this vision of what this could be, I'm going to go for it. That takes a huge leap of faith. You know, how hard is that when you sit there and like all of a sudden like you wake up, say at like 2:00 in the morning, and go, yeah, I need to do this, right? How is that process for you? It's hard. Like with like, I don't know, it's putting in place the things that you want to do is actually really hard for people. And I'm starting to notice this more as I talk to friends of mine or people I haven't seen in a long time, and they tell me about these certain things they've always wanted to do. That's why I always tell my friends or people that I just meet for the first time, it's like, go for it. And I feel like a lot of people don't have that push to be just like, just do what you love. Like, just do it. Who cares? Everyone's so afraid of always failing or people making fun of them for doing something. Who cares, man? Just go do it. It's not going to like hurt you in any way if people don't like what you're doing. If it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out, but at least you know you tried. So for me, it's like, oh, well, why didn't I keep going with YouTube? I should have kept going. And it's like, well, maybe I was afraid of failing at it. Maybe I wasn't that good or whatever it was. But that kind of, you got to take that out of your mind altogether and go for those things. But it's really hard for people because there's so many restraints. Like I've been talking to my friend who has so many ambitions. I talked to him one day. I'm like, I want to make a cartoon. I want to make an adult cartoon about a duck. And it's very strange, but I just want to see where it goes. I don't know. And I was talking to him and he was telling me all these ambitions that he had. And it's like, what's holding you back? You're almost 30 years old. Just do it. But real life comes into play a lot of the time too, right? You got to balance work life. You have to balance, just doing your everyday thing. Some people don't have that ability, which is, it sucks. But if you're passionate about something, just go for it and don't worry about the repercussions. Because my podcasts aren't successful in any rate. It's something that I'm building, that I want to be successful, but I'm doing it. And I might be a laughing stock or whatever. I have no idea, but I enjoy doing it. That's the most important thing. Just go do it.
I know you're a big proponent of that too. Like,
Oh, absolutely.
I see you. The things that you do is, I don't know how you have the time that you have, to be honest. I know, like, you have children, you have gigs with your band, you have a full-time job. Man, it's like you love these things and you love playing for your band, but you also have a family and you're able to do all that. And I respect that so much.
Insider tip: I have the time stone.
Oh, okay, that makes sense. You just go back in time all the time to make time. Gotcha.
Pretty much. You didn't see Doctor Strange use it in the new Spider-Man trailer. Now you know where it went. Steve Rogers brought it to me.
You need it.
The sacred timeline is ruined. Thank you, Steve Rogers. But all these ideas and all this, all the content that you've created, all the dreams that you have chased, there has to be a lot of inspiration that backs all that. So where does your inspiration stem from?
Oh my God. I don't even know, to be honest. Like I don't know. When I was a child, like, I always wanted to be an actor or like some sort of, I don't know. I wanted to make things that people could watch. I like making people laugh. I like talking to people. I like listening to their stories. Like, I love social interaction. And for me, I think that's where my inspiration comes in. There's no specific person. Like, my dad's a maintenance man and my mom works in a retirement home. Like, and they're Portuguese immigrants. So their whole, like, there's no film background with me or whatever it is. Like, I come from a middle-class family from immigrant parents. Like, their passions were not, movies and video games or whatever the hell. But for me, like, the inspiration is just like, I like to make people laugh and I like to talk things out with people. And I like listening to different people's stories and all that stuff. So I want to bring that to life. So there's no drive from something that I've experienced. It's mostly just, I just love it. So I just want to find a way to do it the best way I can. And there's been so many roadblocks along the way, but you have to have like a short memory and you have to not think about, not have to dwell on things in order to pursue some of these things you want to.
Obviously, inspiration strikes and then you formulate a plan and you execute it, and you get product A out of it, whether it be the YouTube channel, whether it be a podcast, whether it be anything that you have chased after. But along the way, as you mentioned, there's usually a lot of roadblocks. There's speed bumps on the road to everything. Yeah. And a lot of the time you have to go through and fight fatigue, time limitations, resources, the endurance it takes to chase a dream. So when the slowdown hits, when you get tired, what is it that helps carry you through?
Wow, that's so deep. I don't know. I feel like my trust in myself and the people around me and my short memory in terms of every day I wake up, I'm not bothered by the things that happened before, for the most part. I don't know. There's certain areas in my life where I will always hold a grudge on certain things, but I know that's something I need to work on. But in terms of like just failing or not being in a place where I want to be, I always see myself as I'm still happy. Does that make sense? So I'm still like, I'm in good spirits. And I think that's why I'm able to push myself through these things, is because I don't dwell on a lot of the problems that are out of my control for the most part. There are certain ones though that still hurt pretty bad, but I'm always just in good spirits. I'm never in a really terrible mood. And even things don't pan out the way I want them to, I kind of brush it off. And I think that's really important. Especially if you're like a content creator or you're trying to, there's just so much out there now. You just got to do it because you love it. And then if it doesn't work, you just got to brush it off and keep going. And it sounds cliche, but it really is true.
As a content creator, as someone who has put product out there for the public to consume, obviously anyone who does that is trying to get their voice heard, and as we know, there are tons, millions of podcasts out there.
Yeah.
There are millions of YouTube channels, and it can be hard sometimes to actually be heard. So as a content creator, what's more important to you? Fulfilling the dream regardless of the audience, or the audience hearing what it is you have to say?
Ooh. I'm not too plussed about people hearing what I have to say. I just like to, whatever, I don't know, I'll say whatever, and if people listen, they listen. If they don't, they don't. But there also is like a certain aspect of, you can do things you're passionate about, but if it's not going anywhere, that you hit a rut, or you get depressed about it, right? Like you almost have to have a little bit of both. Like, you can be super passionate about something, but if it doesn't work, then sometimes you have to let it go, right? So it's so tough. It's I always think of it too. It's like, I don't know, there's so many crazy things going on in this world, and I'm talking about video games, so my voice doesn't really matter. I'm just trying to entertain people. I'm not really necessarily, if they take something away from it, great. But at the end of the day, I'm just trying to entertain, because there's so many things, like, God, there's so many things in this world right now, especially during the pandemic and what's going on and climate change and all this stuff. It's like, the least of your problems is listening to me. I just do it because I enjoy it, but I'm not really concerned about, if someone takes something away from me, that's great. But, I just like to talk. And if you want to listen, go for it.
Have you ever had that kind of feedback where someone has either listened to your podcast or, in the days of your YouTube channel, like watched a video and reached out to you and said, you know what, this helped, for whatever it is, they're going through at the time, this helped at that moment. Have you ever had that kind of feedback?
Now that you mention it, dude, like that's an important aspect of it. I think that's what pushes me forward when I hear those certain things. Which I have, and I'm not a huge content creator, and I feel like I've only dipped my toe in a few ventures. For the most part, I did a lot of more corporate stuff. But I've gotten that feedback before, and I got some of that feedback during Autosave right now, and I think that propels me, that drives me to keep going. It's because I know, like, there's at least one person out there that's taking something away from what we're doing, and that's all that really matters for me. I'm not really concerned about the audience. I think if you don't think about it, that audience will come. If you're passionate about something, the audience will come because they can feel the passion from you.
And as any artist, obviously they create art because it's something from within, and then putting out there almost refills the heart because they were able to put their art out there. And going through this pandemic, through this year and a half of isolation, through worry, through, for fear of what could happen if you were to get COVID, like, there's so many emotions that have been felt over the past year and a half. How much has this podcast helped you through all of this?
Wow. A lot, I think. I'm just super passionate about it, and it gives me something to kind of work towards. There's a lot of things I still have to work towards, but for this one, it's so dear to my heart that I do want this to succeed as best that I can. So that's what, I don't know. It's really helped me a lot, because I want to just put so much time and effort into this. That I'm just enjoying the ride, and it's making me kind of forget about a lot of other problems in the world / in my life. It makes me also think, again, I'm doing a goddamn podcast about video games. It's like, I'm pretty, like, I have a luxury here, right? And there's, so.
What is it that gives you the most enjoyment out of this, though? The process or the product?
The product in terms of, like, it coming out, or
exactly, like, the journey to get there, or what comes out at the end of it, the finish line.
I think for me, and I don't know if this answers your question, but playing the game and then having a thought of, like, oh my God, like, did you see this? I need to talk about this. And then talking about it on the podcast, like, that brings me the most joy. And so I don't know if that's necessarily the finished product or if that's
I think that's more the process.
The process, yeah. So I think it's more the process then, because I like to be able to share that, and then that's what I'm really excited for. Like, oh my God, Camille, like, did you see this? That's what I really, really, really excites me.
So you realize it's come to that point, though. We're at that point in the show where it's time to ask the big question.
Big, you've already asked so many big questions.
Yeah, and we've already talked about,
so deep questions, so deep and heavy. You're gonna make me cry.
We've been going easy so far. Now it's time.
All right.
So, Nick,
yes. Yeah.
If you had to introduce yourself to a total stranger,
yeah.
but instead of saying, hi, I'm Nick, I'm co-host of the Autosave Podcast, listen now, you hand them a mixtape. Yeah. And on that tape are songs that tell the story of you. What songs are on that tape, and why are those songs there?
Wiz, man, like I spent so long trying to curate this list because I wanted to go through how to tell myself is like going through years in my life in terms of like what music stood out to me the most. So it's really tough. I have so many songs, but I'll give you like one in each category. How about this?
The sampler, if you will. The Nick Andrade music sampler.
So the first one is a song that gave me good vibes as a child that I remember even at a young age, that I remember so much and that I can sing verbatim. And I remember like sitting in a van with my parents listening to this song on the radio, and it's Sugar Sugar by the Archies.
And you do realize that anyone who's listening to this right now has that song stuck in their head.
Oh, listen, I'm so bad. If someone says a word that reminds me of a song, I start singing it regardless. Like it drives people nuts in general, and then it gets stuck in their head.
And I will point this out right now, because I know my wife listens to the show. Mm-hmm. I'm not the only one who does that. See?
My girlfriend either loves it or hates it. Sometimes she'll sing along, and sometimes like, Nick, why is that in your head? It's like a whole new world pops up in my head, and I start singing it Disney style, like I'm actually Aladdin or I'm on a magic carpet. Doesn't go over so well. But
Nick the musical.
That like Sugar Sugar, it reminds me of like when I was like 4, 5, 6 years old. And that song, whenever it came on, it made me so happy. And whenever I listen to it now, makes me so happy. Like it just lifts my heart, regardless of what time of day or what I'm feeling at the time. Okay, so I got to keep going. Mm-hmm. So now we're into the 6th to 8th grade, and I had a big Michael Jackson phase at the time, but it won't be that. It will be In Too Deep by Sum 41.
Okay.
Sum 41 in that part of my life. Like there's so many there, either rap, rock. I'm pretty eclectic in terms of my taste. I just don't like country music for much, but that song for me was a really big part of my childhood growing up. And I loved Sum 41.
You do realize we've just gone from the Archies to Sum 41.
Oh, Wiss, we are going to go in way weird directions. And it's strange too. Like I was trying to think, because the music, when we were together, I would come into your head, sweet, and we would listen to songs. And I was trying to think, like, is there songs here that are kind of something that we can bond on and relate with? And I'm thinking to myself, I'm not really sure.
I still got Sugar Sugar stuck in my head now, damn it. So
you're gonna have it for the rest of your day, and then your wife's gonna be like, "What the hell? Why the hell is that in there?"
I'm gonna be walking around that's going dun, 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 dun.
Oh, honey.
Yeah, see.
So I'm going now to high school, and this is really tough. I don't really know where to go because there's so many things. Like I was in a Nirvana phase at one point. I was in a pop punk phase. I was in a huge rap phase. But I'm going to go for this one. And this is going to be my pop punk here. This is going to be Welcome to the Black Parade by My Chemical Romance.
Okay.
And I didn't have an emo phase. I didn't have bangs or anything. But I was in so many different friend groups at the time that like it all depended. What I was listening to depended on who I was hanging out with, because they were all the genres were so different in terms of my friend groups. And then university, I'm a big Kanye West fan. even though he's, I think, crazy now, and I don't think his music is as good as it used to be.
I was about to say, you're a Kanye West fan. So is Kanye West. He's a big Kanye West fan too.
Yes. The divergence here. I was a big Kanye West / Kid Cudi fan, and I was also a big Vampire Weekend fan around my university years. But I'll go 2 songs here, and it's Runaway by Kanye West and it's A-Punk by Vampire Weekend. 2 great songs, relatively different. And I'm trying to, in this mixtape, as I was going, I'm trying to think, like, I want people to see how loopsy-lopsy my mixtape is.
You have put the mix in mixtape.
Good. My first mixtape was in grade 7. I asked my brother-in-law, who wasn't my brother-in-law at the time, to make me a burnt CD. And it was actually called Nick's Mix Volume 1. And I remember that. Yes. Some songs on there. There was like Steal My Sunshine from Len.
Oh God.
There was Clint Eastwood by the Gorillaz. There's just so many. All the Small Things, Blink 182. Like
the earworm palooza.
I don't. Okay. Now this is. I don't know, Wis, if you're very passionate about music, but I feel like I'm at the Abe Simpson part of my life, where, what I thought was cool isn't cool anymore. And what's new, I'm not with. And so there's not, like, songs today, there's not much that's really drawing my attention. I don't know how you feel about that.
Oh, I mean, yes, I do get stuck on the bands that, I have always been there with me, in my, musical catalog, but I'm always still listening to, like, I know, like, on Spotify the release radar comes out. I'm always checking it out. I always want to see if quote unquote my bands are actually still putting out new music. And thankfully a lot of the bands I'd listened to are still putting out new music, and in a lot of the cases it's some of the best work they've ever put out, despite the fact that some of their hits were way back when, right. So for me, I know personally I'm still bringing in new music because there is music that's coming out today that is actually inspiring me sometimes more than the music from back then. Yeah.
And then you can maybe play it at shows, right?
Yes. When shows come back. Yes.
Yes. So songs here now, I'm not sure, but this is like more my life now, and where I'm at is, apart from some I'm not going to mention a song here, but I'm really, really into British rap right now. I don't know why it's called. It's called it's like grime music. And I don't know what it is, but it's like the way they do it. It's not like rap now. It's like their own style. And I really love it. But I'm in right now with a very big Beatles phase again. I don't know what the hell triggered that at all. And the song that I just keep listening to over and over all the time is Strawberry Fields Forever. And it's hitting me so much more than it did when I listened to it as a kid. And I think I'm going to ask you this question then, like, as you get older, your music taste, yes, it evolves, but the meaning behind some of your favorite songs change as well, correct?
I think, and that's kind of the whole idea of this show, is that music anchors us to moments in our lives. Like, I still remember the first concert I went to, the first concert my mother brought me to, and the first concert I went to by myself. I still remember the first albums I got, or the first cassettes I got as gifts. I still remember like going and buying, like, I had this whole thing of wanting to buy, you remember 45s, right?
Yep,
like,
I do.
Yeah. I had this dumbass kid idea of getting 45s, and that was going to be the end of my collection. I remember the first vinyl I bought. I remember the first CD I bought with my own money. So yeah, it anchors us to memories in life because maybe it's the earworm ability, being able to, you think about it, and I'm going to drop a really weird reference here. Okay. Cheers, the TV show. Yeah. And you remember the part where, I think it was Sam or somebody was trying to take some GED test. Okay. And coach was using the songs, made up songs in order to help him remember Right, Albania, you border on the Adriatic, right?
You're glad, you should be glad I know these references, okay?
Exactly.
I'm big into 80s shows, so but
there are people right now listening to the podcast, and they're all of a sudden remembering that episode, because it is one of those things where music helps us remember things that are easily forgotten in the passage of time, because music has a way of anchoring into the brain.
Right.
But that's just me.
No, but that's a great point, because I've seen a lot of like videos or on TV where like an elderly person that's suffering from Alzheimer's, and you play a song from like their era, and their eyes just light up and they remember it and what it meant to them. Or even if they didn't have Alzheimer's, but they're very old and they're frail, and you play these songs, it's like the life that comes out of them. And that's why I hate the whole culture of, and I think it's because of everything that's online now, but I look at it like Spider-Man or something like that. It's made for kids, Wiss. And if we don't like it as a 30, 40-year-old, yes, maybe we will like it. And I love all things Marvel, so it doesn't really matter. But people put stock into it, like, oh, it's not good, it's garbage, whatever. And then someone who's 7 years old remembers that movie and remembers how good it was to them. Like, there's so many movies when I was a kid that were trash that I watch now. I know that they're not good, but they hold a special place in my heart. And it's like all of this stuff. So when people say, oh, music today is bad, well, I mean, kids today connect with that music. And there's a bond between myself and my friends and people that I know within like musics of like the 2010s and the late 2000s that we will always remember, that will always hold a special place in my heart. And then kids will say, oh, well, I don't know. And then people get, up in arms because, oh, you don't remember that band? It was a bad, like, okay, just leave it alone. And it's the same thing with kids today and songs. It's like they like their music. We might not attach to it, but when they're 30, when they're 40, when they're 50, it'll go with them. And that'll always be. So whether music is, I don't know, people think that your favorite band is dead or they suck now or whatever it is. I think that's bull. Or bull. Sorry if we need to mute that word, but it's for everyone. It doesn't really matter what it is, and if it means something to you at the time, it's going to mean something to you. So I always think like that. I
think that there's also like just a good wisdom in there, in that, and maybe you'll agree with this. It being a content creator, being someone who puts something out into the world, whether it's literature, whether it's music, whether it's podcasts, whether it's painting, whatever it is, and you put it out there for people. Yeah. Everything is a favorite to somebody. Everyone is someone's favorite, no matter what it is, no matter who hears it out there, everyone is someone's favorite. And every song that comes out is going to resonate with someone. And that's where this kind of all comes from.
Yeah.
But
sorry, go ahead.
As I said, but now let's step back to the Autosave podcast, because I am curious, because we talked about what it is that makes a game for you, and I think back to some of the games that have these really, really impactful soundtracks. So, can you think of a moment in your gaming history where you're sitting there playing the game and the music just became this uber immersive experience for you?
For me, it was, I don't care what people say about this game, but it's Kingdom Hearts, and it's a Final Fantasy type game by Square Enix that also incorporates Disney characters, which it could be it's not for everybody. But as a kid, I think it was 2005 or 2004. I don't know what year it was, but the ending of that game had a beautiful soundtrack. I can't remember who the artist is. I know it's a Japanese artist, and they did an English and Japanese version. And at the end of the game, that whole process of everything that you go through, this journey of these characters, you're happy, sad, whatever it is. If there was a bad ending, if something sad happened or whatever, you're on this huge emotional journey. And then that crescendo of the final kind of cutscene song just hits you so hard. And I think that's the example for me, but there's so many games out there as well. When you finish a game and there's some sort of anthem to it at the end that really encapsulate everything. I think that's what's so impressive about, I mean, gaming, it's an art form, and it also contains a lot of music, whether it's new music or an orchestra or some sort of classical or whatever the hell it is. I'm just like, there's always something that connects it with it. And I just love that whole aspect. And usually at the end of the game, you're satisfied by what it's about and the music that's in it.
People who are listening right now, whether they are future podcasters or future broadcasters, or just dreamers that have an idea and they hear your story, they hear everything that you've done to get to where you are, what advice would you give to that person sitting at home with the headphones with sugar now stuck in their head and has a dream? What advice would you give to them?
I feel like it's always cliche, but it's literally hold on to your dreams no matter what. Don't let anybody say that it's stupid, because it's not. To you, it's not stupid. And again, to other people, like I said before, there's 7 billion people on this earth. You will find people who have similar tastes as you and will find those things that you like, and they will follow along. So if you have an idea, you have something you want to explore, go do it. If you can make time, I know that not everybody can make time or has the luxury of time to do these things. But if you do, and there's so many ideas that you have in your head that you want to accomplish, also talk to a friend. I don't think so many people are afraid to tell their friends certain like things they want to do. It's like, if you have similar interests, like those people will help you in that journey. And if you have connections or you have friends who are willing to help you out, like don't be afraid to call people or talk to people about these things. Like, again, like I mentioned I had an idea about a cartoon with a duck, and I talked to my friend who had similar interests to me, and we started building a story about it. And that's all it takes. It just put it out into the universe and say it out loud, and don't be afraid, because again, there's so many bad things going on in this world, or good things, or whatever it is. But what we're doing is not life-threatening or life-ending. So it's like, you only have a certain amount of time in this earth. Just go do the things you love to do, regardless of how cliche that is. It's so true, because at the end of the day, when you're, I'm very existential, but when you're on your deathbed, you don't want to regret a lot of things. You want to be able to look back at your life and be happy with the decisions that you made. So don't regret not doing something just because you felt like maybe people wouldn't care, because there's always going to be at least one person that's going to care.
Nick, thank you so much for this. Where can we hear your podcasts? Where can we see your work? And where can we find you out in the interwebs?
Well, my podcasts are Autosave and a football podcast. A football podcast comes out every Tuesday morning, and Autosave comes out every Wednesday. Autosave, I think, is my biggest passion project. I'm really excited about. You can basically find it on anywhere you get your podcast, Spotify, Apple. It's pretty much everywhere. We use a system that throws it out to so many even different countries and their platforms as well. So go take a listen. It comes out every Tuesday and Wednesday morning. And other than that, I'm excited to see where it goes.
And tell me true. Okay?
Yes. Okay.
Not looking for spoilers here.
Yeah.
The next game on Autosave Podcast, is it Pong?
You got me, man. Pong would be, I don't even know how I would do a podcast for Pong. It would almost be like I'm an announcer in sports, and I'm just like, and he moves, it goes back there, and it goes back, oh, and he scores. That was basically
next on the Ocho, Nick Andrade, play-by-play for Pong. It's a bold move, Cotton. Let's see how that plays out. Nick, thank you so much for this. And to all of our listeners, thank you for listening to the Mixtape Podcast. Now, if you're listening to us on an audio streaming service, you can watch this entire interview over on YouTube. But if you're watching us on YouTube, you can go to any podcast catcher service, whether it's Spotify, Apple, Good Pods, Google, TuneIn, just someone screaming it out over a bullhorn. However you're hearing it, you can download it and listen to us on the go. Thank you so much for listening to this edition of the Major Mixtape Podcast. I'm Jason. We'll catch you next time. Take care.